Is everybody in?
Looks like it.
Great, thank you very much. Good evening. I'm calling this public hearing to order at 6:01 p.m. in accordance with the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act, MGLC 131, Section 40, and the Boston Wetlands Ordinance, Boston City Code Ordinances, Chapter 7-1.4. The Boston Conservation Commission will hold a virtual public hearing this evening on January 18th to review the following projects to determine what conditions, if any, the commission will impose in order to protect the interest of the public in private water supply, groundwater, prevention of pollution, flood control, prevention of storm damage, protection of fisheries and land containing shellfish, and protection of wildlife habitat. Tonight, the commission's public hearings will be followed by our regular meeting. In accordance with Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022, we are conducting this meeting online. To ensure public access to the deliberations of the Conservation Commission, the public may access this call through telephone and video conferencing. Additionally, the meeting is being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, please turn off your video. Members of the public may have an opportunity to ask questions and provide public comment on applications and discussions. To do so, please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you're calling in and cannot use the platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 and *6 to unmute yourself. Send your questions to staff via email at cc@boston.gov or via Twitter by tagging the Twitter handle @BostonEnviro and using the hashtag ConComHearing. For the record, I am Michael Parker, Chair of the Commission. I'll call the roll of commissioners present. Commissioner Sullivan?
John Sullivan.
Thank you. Commissioner Gearin?
Aldo Gearin.
Is Commissioner Wilson with us this evening? Take that as a no. Commissioner Conan?
Conan Thiruvengadam, I'm here. Chuck Parker.
Thank you. Commissioner Richmond?
I'm here. Alice Richmond.
Thank you. Commissioner Herbst?
Ann Herbst.
Okay. And no Commissioner Wilson, right, Allison?
No, not yet.
Okay, but we're expecting him. Okay, this would be the opportunity for City of Boston staff to introduce themselves. Who do we have?
Allison Brizius from the Environment Department.
Kat Eschel, Environment Cabinet.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, the first item on the agenda this evening is notice of intent for DEP file number 0069113 and Boston file number 2022-058 from Niche Engineering on behalf of Boston Scores for the proposed construction of a new field house, 3 artificial turf fields, new access driveways, parking lot, and stormwater management system located at 1 Westbrook Street in East Boston. The resource area is land subject to coastal storm flowage. Who's here on behalf of the applicant?
Joshua Soares with Niche Engineering.
Great. Anyone else?
Yep. I'm joined today by John Makanga, the Executive Director with Boston Scores, Josh White, the architect with Magulis Peruzzi, and also David Warner, the landscape architect with Warner Larson.
Fantastic. Okay, floor's all yours.
Great. Okay, yeah, so again, thank you for the introduction. Again, my name is Josh Soares, civil engineer. Again, accompanied by John Makanga with Boston Scores, Josh White, the architect, David Warner, the landscape architect. And we are here before you this evening for the Boston Scores project located at 1 Westbrook Street in East Boston. I'm going to just go ahead now and hand it over to John Makanga, who can kind of give you a quick background on the project.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us here tonight. So I am John Makanga, Executive Director for Boston Scores. We're happy to be partnering with the Salesian Boys and Girls Club on this project. We've received a lot of support for preserving this space as an outdoor recreation and education space for neighborhood youth. We've presented to the Harborview Neighborhood Association just last week to the abutters and plan to present again to Harborview Neighborhood Association at its February meeting, hopefully for a vote. We've worked really hard to include features in the project for the community at large, working with the club to make what historically has been a gated and closed space that's not available to the public, making time available so the public can use this space. We've included a number of elements like the walking path around the field, the community gardens, the outdoor classroom, the playgrounds, all to help make the facility more amenable to the community at large. It does include off-street parking to minimize impact on local streets, improves the overall presentation of the field, and makes the usage of the field more convenient through the addition of the storage and bathroom facility. So I'll leave it to our team to talk through the environmental impacts, but we've worked really hard to balance both usability to maximize the availability of the space to be used with what we think is a very environmentally thoughtful approach. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the team.
Great, thank you. Hey, John, you look and sound familiar. Were you at Courageous Sailing? Okay.
Yes, I was executive director there. We did meet as part of some of the conversations around Flagship 4 at the time.
Great. Okay.
Nice to see you.
Welcome. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, great. So yeah, with that, I'm just going to quickly talk about the existing conditions at the site. So again, the project site is located at 1 Westbrook Street. It's bounded by Forest Street and residential dwellings to the west, an alleyway and residential dwellings to the north, the MBTA Blue Line to the south, and also Westbrook Street to the east. You can go to the next page, please. So, why we're here today is because the site is located entirely within the FEMA flood hazard area, or the land subject to coastal storm flowage. The floodplain has a base flood elevation through the site at elevation 16.46 Boston City base. And based on the city's climate ready map, our site has a sea level rise base flood elevation of 19.5 and a sea level rise design flood elevation of 20.5. Next slide, please. So here, the survey where you can see the limits of the project area, and the blue shade essentially is the limits of the floodplain. As I said, it encompasses the entirety of the site. The existing site is comprised of a natural turf field, which generally slopes from the southwest corner of the parcel to the northeast, ultimately to Westbrook Street. The existing closed drainage system on the site consists really of just some catch basins and some manholes, which capture and convey the stormwater runoff to Westbrook Street. There's also a current existing maintenance building that's located along the western edge of the property line adjacent to Horace Street that we will be removing as part of the site improvements. Next slide, please. And just for some context, a couple of photos. The first looking east off of Horace Street at the existing egress point with the gate. You can see the natural turf field and the perimeter invasive shrubbery and landscape that you can see also looking west off of Westbrook Street. So in talking about the landscape, now I'll hand it off to David Warner, the project landscape architect, to talk about the landscape and the site layout.
Thanks, Josh. So I'll just briefly, if you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. I'll just briefly discuss the proposed conditions. And this plan is simply an overlay of the flood plain on the proposed conditions. If we then continue to the next slide, we can describe the proposed site conditions a little bit more easily. So starting off with the site, it's pretty open overall, but there is a little bit of vegetation that's crept in from the west and from the east, and largely invasive species. That vegetation will need to be cleared in order to be able to develop the site. The plan is shown. And what you're seeing here are the 3 synthetic turf fields that Josh mentioned, 1 primary field and then 2 supplemental fields. Those are comprised of the synthetic turf and sand and organic plant-based infill material that we know from the draft order of conditions that's been circulated. The vendors that we're sourcing this material from will be able to comply with those criteria that have been drafted in that order of conditions. And those are permeable surfaces on top of stone. So all the water that falls onto them drains straight through it into the subsurface collection system, as is the playground, which is highlighted in blue there. And John mentioned the outdoor classroom, which is that little area to the north that's surrounded by a small grove of trees next to the community garden. So we've got a lot of permeable surfaces here that are going to be able to absorb the rainfall that lands on them. As far as the number of trees that are proposed here, I think we have 31 proposed trees in this area. The plant schedule and what was submitted also includes planting that's going to be installed around the building. That's not part of this notice of intent, but 31 proposed trees as part of this plan in this area to answer that question. And I know the sensitivity to the heat island, we can get into talking about that in more detail later, but in the interest of time to focus on just providing an overview, I think that's about the extent of it. That white outline that you see there, Josh White is going to be describing a little bit more detail about that field support building. I would like to point out, though, that the landscape treatment that we're doing here as part of this project is all going to be low maintenance, easy to maintain planting. Next slide.
And thank you, David. So I'll just go over briefly what the support building will be used for. So the building will house several restroom, changing room facilities, a small family restroom, and then a small shower facility. It'll also house a storage component that will be used to store field materials as well as the maintenance equipment for the field. And we're working with Boston Scores to provide all the infrastructure they need for all their maintenance equipment to be electrified, and none of it will be petroleum powered. You can go to the next slide. So the building elevations demonstrate where the overall flood elevations, the design flood elevation, as well as the sea level rise elevation fall within the building. So we've used flood resistant materials for the structure and finishes on the exterior and interior of the building. Throughout that first 10 feet of the structure, all of our mechanical equipment will be mounted in the roof ceiling structure, and exterior equipment will be mounted on top of the building. Next slide. And Josh can talk a little bit more about the drainage and stormwater management.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Yeah, coming full circle here to wrap up to discuss the proposed site utilities and stormwater management system. Like David said, the goal of the project was to provide as much permeable surfacing as possible, knowing that we are located within the floodplain and want to promote as much infiltration and flood storage as possible. So located adjacent to Horace Street along the entire western edge, we are proposing a porous asphalt system, which has been designed to detain and infiltrate up to the 100-year storm event. We do have some proposed water quality inlets located at low points in this parking lot that will only really function, during an emergency overflow event or should maintenance impact the integrity of the system. So we have that portion of the site tying into some existing drainage infrastructure that we are going to maintain, which is being routed around the perimeter of the site. And then as we move towards the center of the field, or the center of the site, we have the large play field area and the smaller accessory field below that. And all the synthetic turf fields are underlain by an extra reservoir course for extra detention and infiltration purposes. Any overflow will discharge to the larger diameter solid header pipes along the edges of the field, where they'll continue working their way east, where the drainage system will tie into the other porous asphalt parking lot located off of Westbrook Street, where all the stormwater ultimately discharges to the existing main in Westbrook Street. So even though we are located in the land subject to coastal storm flowage, and we do not, we're not required to provide peak rate attenuation for the proposed development, we've gone ahead in the best interest of the project and East Boston to mitigate all the storm events with the increase in impervious area. As far as the site utilities, there is a new 6-inch sewer from the building connecting to the existing sewer in Westbrook Street and a new 2-inch copper water service. There is a new transformer that's proposed off of the Westbrook Street parking lot. However, at this time, we're still working closely with Eversource to confirm the exact electrical infrastructure. So I know that'll be certainly a point of comment from the commission that we're still working through. And if you go to the next slide, please, you'll be able to see more clearly where we're proposing those porous asphalt systems. They are highlighted in the peach color, and then the blue color representing the underground infiltration system beneath the turf field, and also a perforated pipe, a below ground perforated pipe in crushed stone system that captures the roof area of the new accessory building. So with that, we'll just open it up to questions and comments from the commission.
Okay, great. Thank you. Before we do that, I just want to remind members of the public to provide public comment. Please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you're calling in and cannot use the platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 and *6 to unmute yourself. Send your questions to staff via email at cc@boston.gov or via Twitter by tagging the Twitter handle @BostonEnviro and using the hashtag ConcomHearing. Okay, so just a few things. I think you foreshadowed areas that we would want to focus on. First question is about the heat island. In the NOI, you state that the area is located within an area of low heat island intensity. There's a pervious field, then go on to say that there will be an increase in impervious area. However, the new pedestrian experience will improve and mitigate any adverse impacts by any potential changes to the, heat island at the site. Could you further explain that statement?
Sure, I'll mostly defer to David on that. With the proposed shade trees along the southern boundary of the field areas, and also the use of the organic infill, along with some water filling stations at the building, the intent is to mitigate the impact to the heat island.
Understood.
Right.
So that falls under the rubric of the pedestrian experience, I guess.
Right. So the pedestrian experience related to people that the general members of the public that might be passing through the site to access the play areas or the picnic spaces, as well as the athletes who are going to be using the fields. With synthetic turf fields, they are a synthetic surface, in terms of what we've learned through my career in working with this type of product. We're using an infill that's actually hydrophilic, that absorbs moisture out of the air in the evening and then overnight, and then transpires that moisture during the day, helping to lower the surface temperature of that artificial surface. So that's why we're pointing to that as one of the mitigating aspects. But of course, shade is a very important part of helping to make the space more comfortable for people. And it's the trees primarily that we're proposing, that we're relying on for that. And we're using primarily shade trees of those 31 that I mentioned, that would be of a larger canopy as they mature. So it's a combination of factors. I think, and Josh, I'm glad you pointed out that the water, the bottle filling station, the drinking water, I think that's a really important part, particularly for athletes, the kids that are going to be using these fields, to stay properly hydrated.
Okay. Thank you. And my assumption is the materials for the turf fields are not recycled, but virgin rubber products.
Well, actually, we're not using any rubber. We're not proposing any
Okay.
rubber with the system. It's a polyethylene fiber that's stitched into a woven backing, just like a carpet. And the infill that goes into those fibers is a combination of sand, a dust-free sand, and the wood product. It's basically a granular wood, which is the cellulose of the part of a tree. And that cellulose is what's hydrophilic. It's what absorbs moisture in the evening and gives it off during the daytime.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. Question on the electric panel for the main circuit breaker, and that a portion of it is below the sea level rise design flood elevation. And I know we've run into this issue before regarding the maintenance and repair of these electrical components. We clearly like to see that electrical panel as close to the DFE as possible or raised. What can we do there?
So it will currently be above the design flood elevation. And we're looking at products that we can use to be above the sea level rise elevation as it stands now. Some manufacturers are using horizontal panels. It's basically, the lowest level, the lowest fuse switch needs to be at a certain height to meet maintenance requirements and electrical code. And given the fact that the use of the building is directly tied to getting out onto the field and accessibility, it's tough to mount that at that height with the sea level rise elevation. So we're looking at materials for that and seeing what we can do. But with a traditional panel, it would be below that sea level rise elevation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we did talk about the increase in impervious area. I think we're looking, and I defer to the rest of the commissioners. One of the comments we got was needing more detail on the plans for the subsurface stormwater detention. And I'll just throw that out there for your consideration. Whenever we have infrastructure like this, we clearly want to see in the files O&M plan for the field maintenance and for the porous asphalt here. Want to make sure that it's being cleaned with the proper machines and being cleaned at the proper intervals. So that's a condition we would add to the order of conditions. I know that you said 31 new trees are being proposed. Are there going to be any trees removed?
So we don't have the individual trees and sizes and types quantified. I'd be happy to do that as a follow-up, but I personally walked the site and back when there were leaves in the trees, and to a large extent, they're almost all invasive in species. So, I think that I know that those have some climate benefit, but they aren't good for habitat value. So, I don't know in terms of the formula that you're looking for, balancing the removals with replacements or increasing. If let us know specifically what you're looking for, and we'd be happy to quantify those.
Okay, yeah, I think that we generally require some sort of a tree inventory, tree restoration plan, more details on the DBH calcs and all of that. So that is definitely something that we are used to seeing. Okay, we talked about this before, the final specifications of the turf prior to construction. You did a good job of explaining it, but we'd like to see the manufacturer's specs there. I think you explained the building in the floodplain. So with that, Allison, if you had anything, I think I go to Commissioner Sullivan.
I think you covered most of my questions. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Commissioner Sullivan?
Yeah, did you say over the entire impervious surface, how much water you're capturing to infiltrate?
Yeah, so John, we actually submitted the site plan package to Boston Water and Sewer shortly after the submission of this NOI a few weeks ago. And with that, obviously, is included the stormwater report and an O&M plan. And Mr. Chairman, just for your reference, the O&M plan does currently include the procedures for the porous asphalt systems. However, we will be sure to include the maintenance associated with the synthetic turf fields. And so with the proposed systems, we are providing, let me see, I have a note here. We're providing 7,979 cubic feet of recharge volume, and that's associated with the dead volume or dead storage beneath the porous asphalt systems and also the dead storage beneath the synthetic turf fields.
Yeah, so I guess my question is, are you taking care of the 2-inch rainfall, 1-inch rainfall?
So the 1-inch requirement is 730 cubic feet. And so we're certainly surpassing that requirement.
Yeah, okay, so you didn't calculate it out, you just said we have a lot of storage underneath.
In the stormwater report and in the HydroCAD, you'll see the breakdown for each individual system where it's broken down for each porous asphalt system, the one located off Horace Street and the one located off Westbrook, and then also each individual field with its own associated recharge volume, because they're all at different elevations. So included in the HydroCAD model is each pond.
Sure. The only other question I had is we see a lot of maintenance plans, a lot, and especially with porous paving, et cetera. And everyone says, yeah, once a year we'll do some regenerative vacuum sweeping, et cetera. And nobody owns these units. You got to contract it. How can we be sure that 2 years into it and money's tight and the thing looks good, it gets done? How do we guarantee that? Is there funding or what's up?
Yeah, I'll leave that to John. I know as John stated, the Boston Scores, they are committed to providing these facilities to the public and maintaining them, and putting our best foot forward as far as resiliency goes. So yeah, I would hope that there are certainly funds allocated for the maintenance of these systems.
Yeah, we entered, excuse me, a 40-year lease as part of this arrangement. The project itself is fully funded. We do expect to generate revenue from the field complex during times where youth are not able to use the field, that we believe is going to create a sufficient revenue stream to help us maintain the field and preserve its initial condition as much as possible. In terms of Boston Scores, it is Boston Scores that's responsible for the maintenance of the field. And we have a nearly 25-year history of, sound financial practices to make sure that we're sustainable and able to meet those commitments.
Yep. All right, that's all I have for questions.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Gearing?
Yes, some of the questions John had, I also had, and so I appreciate the answers that we just received. I serve as the representative for the Parks Commissioner, who's an ex officio member of this commission, and so I'm pretty impressed that this open space is going to be preserved as an open space for youth to use for sports, but also now it's being brought into use by the public. I have some questions about that, but I'll defer that later. So I'm generally I find this pretty favorable project for East Boston in general. However, I have kind of a really basic question, a kind of like a really got to pull back here and go, okay, why are we even talking about this? And the reason is this. I looked at the notice of intent today, and the notice of intent of computer file, it's a PDF, did not contain the notice of intent form that indicates who the owner is and so on and so forth. It's a standard form that DEP produces. And I guess also our own form is missing as well. Also, the abutter notification section of the NOI is missing. So I just have a question now for our chairman, who's our resident legal expert. Are we, what kind of a situation are we in here? Is this something that we should even be hearing, or do we need to defer to a later date on this? Any advice here? I'd really like to hear.
Sure. I think you're using the term legal expert very loosely, and I appreciate that. I would ask Allison, because I'm not able to access the Google file at this particular moment.
I'm checking it,
Yeah.
commissioners. It could be that there is a copy error into your file, but I will confirm that, and apologies if that was an issue.
Yeah, and I'd like to speak on that as well. I'm I'm fully confident we included all required documents per the submission checklist. We even had some back and forth at the time of the initial filing with Kate, the previous administrator, to ensure that she had all the required documents before we were accepted and placed on the agenda. We even had, regarding the signature pages and those front end forms, we were actually requested to provide new signatures because the commission didn't like, or she didn't like where we had a signature. So and the abutter form as well needed a modification. So I know hard copies and digital copies made their way to the commission, and I'd be happy to share, new copies of those files if needed.
Okay, all right, sounds good. Yeah, so let me get back to my questions about how this is going to work as a recreational facility. As I understand it, because not only did I look at the notice of intent, I also went to the Suffolk County Registry of Deeds to determine who, things about ownership and such. This property still remains in the ownership of the Salesian Society, which used to own Dom Savio High School. This property was known as the Dom Savio Field. And so now that high school is no more, and I think it's been replaced by the Brook Charter School in East Boston. So I understand that you guys have a lease and on this. But I also know that the Brook Charter School has some relationships here. So what percentage of the time is, the fields devoted to use by the charter school? Is the Don Bosco Boys and Girls Club, do they have a certain amount of time that they get to use it, et cetera? In other words, what percentage of the time does the general public get to use the fields?
Yeah, so I guess I can answer that. So there's multiple agreements that control those relationships. There's agreements between Boston Scores and Brook Charter School, between Boston Scores and the Salesian Boys and Girls Club, between Salesian Boys and Girls Club and Brook Charter School. But at a high level, the Brook Charter School does use this field for its physical education classes. It has not used it significantly in recent years because of the condition of the field is not particularly amenable to that. So they do plan to use it more consistently going forward, and that would be the primary use during the school day. Boston Scores is an after-school program, and we have primary access to the large field, and we'll be running our after-school programs there and some weekend programs. The club will have the two smaller fields that you noted on the plan. One of them is primarily for Brook Charter School. The second one is for the Salesian Boys and Girls Club. There's a very detailed schedule that allocates different days a week, different times a year to each of those three parties. The Salesians does have access to the fields on the weekends for certain portions of the weekends, and they've committed to making sure that there's portions of those times in particular where the fields are made available to the public, both to access the community gardens and to have family-related events and access for use of the playground and related facilities. There's not a specific schedule for the extent of that availability. The facility is gated and it will continue to be gated and secured every evening. And so even the time that the facility is made available to the public, it will essentially be a supervised time where the gates will be unlocked and then relocked at the end of that period of time.
Great, thanks. Let's see. I just wanted to, reiterate what Chair Parker said about needing a plan for the existing trees indicating, having an inventory of the species, the DBHs, et cetera. One man's invasive is another man's, most desired tree. And so I just want to have, I think that, that's a very reasonable ask on our part. Yeah, that's all I have at the moment.
Great. And I couldn't find the notice of intent forms or the
Yeah.
abutters.
I have an update, Chair Parker. It looks as though when we went to combine multiple PDFs, there was corruption, and I've shared all of the individual documents into the folder. So you have them for your review now.
They're in
Apologies
now?
to not
Yep.
capture that sooner.
Okay. Okay.
Great,
Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Wilson.
Hi, sorry to join late, folks. Anyways, appreciate the diligent efforts of commission staff and asking all the questions. They're good, and I think the only comments I would have is just sort of making sure that we track for consistency the turf order of conditions that we put in place for Charlestown, and then some of the signage for in terms of hours of use and public access to facilities and stuff like that we've put in other places, like for I think Simmons, Emerson, a bunch of these other sort of shared fields within the city, just so that folks are aware of sort of that these are shared facilities. The only other thing I was noticing, just sort of, and this is outside of kind of our scope of jurisdiction, but is that the proximity sort of across the blue line to Constitution Beach, whether there would be signage in terms of like how to navigate from, here to there, but there's tracks in the way.
Yeah, there is a pedestrian bridge very nearby from Constitution Beach over the tracks, and you would walk down Bennington Street. I do think this project is a little bit different than like the Simmons project, in that there's no government land involved. There's no government funding involved. We are making it time available to the public, but that's as just being a good neighbor versus another sort of requirement that might have arisen through another process.
Okay, yeah, no, appreciate that clarification. So yeah, no, I think that's all fair, and yeah, hopefully those shade trees thrive there on the south side of the project.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Conan.
Thank you, Chair Parker. So I appreciate the stormwater management plans, but given that it is also subject to salt water, what is the plan for handling salt water, and do you know what the impacts are of salt water?
So within the porous asphalt system, so again, all recharge system, subsurface detention, it will get that capture through the permeable surfaces. So the salt water, I'm not completely sure, but I can't imagine that would impact the permeability of those surfaces, of rainfall versus floodwaters from coastal sources. But we do have water quality inlets proposed still within those porous asphalt areas, and those are designed to detain any total suspended solids even when they're completely inundated. So whatever treatment they've previously provided and what type of sediment they're storing, none of that will be reintroduced into the drainage system if they're surcharged by the coastal floodwaters.
I'm trying to understand if you have some sort of assurance from the vendors of the turf that saltwater infiltration will work just the same as fresh water from the rain.
I can speak to that, Josh. We will certainly inquire about that. I think that's a new question. So it's a saline solution, basically salt dissolved in water, and it's a leachable material. So the frequency of that relative to the frequency of natural rainfall is such that I would feel quite confident, but we'll ask them and get an answer for you, that it will wash through the system because the rainfall will be much more frequent than any sort of surcharging from storm events.
That is true. I guess when we talk about, I mean, we're supposed to look at climate change for the next 50 years. So that puts us at 2073, right? And when you think about that, that sort of saltwater inclusion in our consideration becomes critical. So, but thank you for offering to inquire about that with the vendors. In terms of the shade trees and addressing heat island effect, is the only shade going to be, I realize there's a building, but it's a small building, right? Is the only shade going to be from the trees that will be planted, and when will they start providing that shade?
So we have some fairly large trees specified in, above 3-inch caliper. And as we all know, it does take time for canopy to develop. And just in terms of what that means in number of years, we could, I think, as a follow-up, show 10 years out, 15 years, 20 years out in terms of canopy size to give you a sense of coverage. That might be a good way to answer that question.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you. And this is not specific to this particular project. This next question, the utility company's requirements as to the height of where the mechanicals are placed, this comes up often. I wonder if it's an actual requirement or a preference for convenience for their work. Do you know?
Are you asking like specifically about the electrical panel?
Yeah.
The electrical code states like what the lowest and highest fuses are for those panels for when someone's standing in front of them to work on it. The idea is that you don't want someone up on a ladder messing with electrical gear. Other than that, all our other mechanical and electrical infrastructure will be up above the sea level rise elevation, pending confirmation with the Eversource on the exterior transformer that we'll need. We're working on them with whether it needs to be a ground transformer or one that's mounted on the pole.
In other words, you're trying to get it to be as high as possible within the code.
Correct.
I see. Thank you. And overflow into the street drain. I'm back to water. Sorry to jump around a little bit. Is that how do you? I mean, usually there's a sense of after 1.5 inch of storm, the water will flow into the city drain. Do we know what that cutoff is? How much will be stored on site, and at what time will it overflow?
I'd have to look a little more closely in the model to get that exact number for you. But based on the recharge volume that we are providing, it would be greater than the 1-inch storm event. There are small portions of landscaped areas along the southern edge, adjacent to the blue line, that we are essentially discharging directly offsite, untreated, unmitigated, because it's such a small landscaped area. So there is some discharge during all storm events. So again, I guess it just depends on what the threshold is that we're looking for. We have, like I said, even though we're in that land subject to coastal storm flowage, and we do not need to provide that peak rate attenuation, we are providing all this extra recharge volume and storage detention to still meet that requirement. And we did that in an effort to provide a resilient design and, just for the neighborhood and not overloading the capacity of the connection in Westbrook Street.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So PFAS have been raised as a concern with artificial turfs, and I don't know to what extent you are concerned about that, but one thing that may be helpful in terms of having data is whatever will flow out of the site. If there is a way to test that, we'll have that data for any future work that we do. That would be one request. So one last question, in terms of the grade level, is this going to be below the grade level of the houses nearby or above or same?
It's mostly depressed. So we are cutting a large portion of the site, and that's in an effort to provide an accessible path, essentially between Horace Street through the site to Westbrook Street. So we are cutting elevations as much as 1.5 feet through the site. And again, in those lower depressed areas adjacent to the blue line, those are significantly reduced from the existing grade.
Does that mean stormwater could flow from the surrounding streets and homes into this space?
No, it's all bisected by existing drainage infrastructure. So the site itself is pretty much self-contained, kind of its own little bowl.
I see. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair Parker.
Commissioner Richmond?
Yeah, I have just a couple of questions. Are you guys now the owners in fee of this land?
I'm not familiar with that terminology. The Salesian
Yeah.
Society continues to own the land. We have a 40-year limited lease to the space. As noted before, we continue to share it with the Boys and Girls Club and with the Brook Charter School, and we'll be making time available to the public as well.
Okay, so you're on a lease and you don't own the land. Was my question.
Okay, that is correct.
Okay, and so I just want to follow up on what Commissioner Wilson said. I appreciate that what you said about it being not public land and therefore you may not have the same obligations for access that public land would have. But I think it would be really important to post the hours or the days when, however it's going to work, when this land is available for public use. Land like this is unusual, and it's something which I think the neighborhood would really like to be part of. And if you post those hours, perhaps there'll be better access to the land.
Point well taken, and we're currently in very active conversations with the neighbors, and it's been a good dialogue.
And how is it that you think you're going to generate income from this land?
Well, so the land is primarily being used to support its existing uses, which is youth-based sports development, hence the soccer fields, the outdoor classrooms, the educational spaces. During times when we're not using it for the program, we do plan to rent it out to other primarily soccer groups for use. So they will pay either an hourly or a bi-hourly fee that will our agreement with the property owners, the club and the Salesians is that money will be designated for maintenance and support of the field.
Okay, that was my next question. You've answered it. Okay, and the last question I have has to do with an answer somebody gave to one of the other questions about the electrical panel. What flood level are you using to determine where that electrical panel is?
So we're using basically the electrical code and building code requirements for the elevation of the electrical panel. And then based on that, it will be above the current design flood elevation, but it will not be above the sea level rise design flood elevation.
So why aren't you going to put it above the sea level rise?
Because we can't, based on the building code, off of the floor.
The building code, you mean ISD won't approve it above a certain size, certain level?
Correct. I mean, we could.
Yeah, Commissioner Richmond, I think that came out in a previous question. It's a safety issue.
Oh,
They
I
don't,
heard the answer.
Yeah,
It
go
doesn't
ahead.
make any sense to me. That's all.
yeah, it's just that they don't want workers servicing the,
No, I heard that. I
The
just-
electrical panel. Okay,
Right,
go ahead.
it seems to me that an electrical panel that's underwater is a lot more dangerous than a guy on a ladder, but I understand. I'm finished. Thank you.
Okay,
I would agree with you there, but my hands are tied until I get an all clear from ISD.
Okay, all right, thank you
Okay.
very much for your answers.
Commissioner Herbst.
I think, excuse me, other commissioners have mostly addressed my questions. I did want to sort of underline Commissioner Sullivan's comment, especially understanding that the porous pavement contributes to your required stormwater infiltration. I just am generally dubious that these places continue to be maintained. So maybe there's something we can think about conditioning, although I think we've thought about this before and haven't come up with a good answer. So, and then the other thing I just wanted to ask about is we as Commissioner Wilson said, we recently permitted a turf field, and there was a lot of talk and concern about what's in the turf and leaching and so forth. And it sounds like you are telling us that you are using a different kind of turf field, and the implication was that these things won't be an issue. But at least speaking for myself, I know nothing about this new type of turf field. So it sounds like you're going to need to get us some other information. I would really like to know more about the specifications for it and any studies or concerns that have been raised about its use. And I'm not sure if this was entirely what Commissioner Conan was getting at, but I do wonder whether the materials, not so much whether they'll function for stormwater infiltration in the case of ocean flooding, but just whether they'll be damaged by ocean water, whether these particular materials will hold up to that. So that's perhaps more a question for you, but we would be concerned about its survivability. That's it for me.
Great, thank you. Okay, Allison, anybody from the public raise their hand? I'm not seeing anyone.
I'm not seeing anything here or in the email inbox.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so I think that very, very thoughtful discussion. I think we have still have a few questions, a few areas to clarify regarding the specifications of the field, a tree inventory, more detail on what's going on there. Looking over my materials here. A few other things. Hopefully you're taking good notes. And so let's try to work on getting the answers to those questions, those outstanding issues. So with that, I would entertain a motion to continue the hearing.
So moved.
We have a second. Thank you, Commissioner Sullivan,
Aye.
Commissioner Guerin,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson,
Aye.
Commissioner Conan. Thank you.
Aye.
Commissioner Richmond,
Aye,
Commissioner Herbst,
Aye.
and I vote aye. That carries, what does that carry? We have 7-0 this evening. Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is DEP file number 0061910 and Boston file number 2023-001 from Beals and Thomas on behalf of Bentall Green Oak for the proposed redevelopment of an existing parking garage into a 4-story laboratory office building located at 17 Farnsworth Street, South Boston. The resource area is land subject to coastal storm flowage. Who's here on behalf of the applicant?
Paula Thompson from Beals and Thomas.
Great.
Mariana
Who else?
Sarfaro from Bentall Green Oak, and we also have the members of the team, Jeff Kim with Perkins and Will, the architect, and we have John Needham with Asset Management at Bentall Green Oak, and Frank Kelly with the contractor, and Paula is the civil engineer, which will take you to the presentation.
Great, thank you. So you have full staff. You should be able to answer all our questions. Okay, who's going to lead it off?
Paula Thompson from Beals and Thomas.
Okay.
So also here with me is Stacy Minahan, also from Beals and Thomas. She looked at the resource areas for us, so any questions specifically on that, she's here for that.
Great.
So this is for a notice of intent for the redevelopment of 17 Farnsworth Street for work within land subject to coastal storm flowage. You can see on this slide 17 Farnsworth is located in the Seaport District, just about 2 streets over from Fort Point Channel. Next slide. Yep. So this is 17 Farnsworth Street. It's existing parking garage. It's accessed from Farnsworth Street to the west. And on the east, it's bounded by a private alley and buildings to the north and south. Next slide. From this slide, you can see this is the FEMA map. So in yellow is the existing garage. We're getting flooding from 4 Point Channel. It's at elevation 16.46 Boston City base. We have a sea level rise BFE of 19.5 and sea level rise design flood elevation of 21.5. Next slide. These are existing photographs of the garage. The top, you can see photographs from the north and from the south, viewed from Farnsworth Street, and on the bottom two are the view from the alley on the backside, again from the south and from the north. Next slide. This is the proposed building, the 4-story lab office building. It's about 78,000 square feet of space. Next slide. So the project, so Farnsworth Street on this plan is kind of at the bottom of each of these views of the building. So what this is showing is that we are planning to demolish the existing building completely. We're going to take out the existing brick sidewalk, and currently, since it's a garage, it does have access in from Farnsworth Street, so that'll be removed. And we're going to replace it with a concrete sidewalk with a permeable paver strip along Farnsworth Street. We are taking out the 4 existing calorie pairs and replacing those with American hornbeam. And the American hornbeam will also have ground cover at the sidewalk level. And then against the building, we're showing we have planters underneath the building overhang. And then on the roof, the second plan on the bottom of the sheet is showing roof planters that we have. Next slide. So this is a site plan. So on this plan, Farnsworth Street is at the top of the sheet. I apologize for the 2 different styles here. This is showing the proposed building, and it's showing a new proposed infiltration system, which meets the requirements of the Mass DEP stormwater management standards. And it also meets BWSC standards by providing 1.25 inches of infiltration over the entire impervious area. We are also in GCOD, so it meets the requirements of GCOD. And smart utilities program is also met with this. This is also showing the limits of our work within Farnsworth Street and within the alley on the backside. So we will have utility connections into both the alley and into Farnsworth Street. And a little bit of regrading in Farnsworth, because right now the garage is accessed at a low point. The low point of the sidewalk right now is about elevation 13. So that's about 3.5 feet lower than existing 100-year flood elevation. So we are putting in a new curb line there, and we're raising the sidewalk so that the sidewalk at the 2 doors that you see on Farnsworth will be raised to elevation 14. And then the first floor elevation actually gets raised to elevation 16, and that's accessed with stairs and an elevator inside the lobby. On the alley side of the building, we have an electrical transformer room inside the building, and that will be raised to elevation 18 to get that as high as possible. And we are working with National Grid on the elevation of that. And as you heard in the previous presentation, they have criteria for access to those, especially to be able to put equipment into the building. So 18 was pretty much the highest we could get that at. Along the front of the building, we'll have window sills that are 2 foot 6 inches above grade. And then we're going to have portable barriers that the owner will deploy that will go up to the design sea level rise design flood elevation of 21.5. The other thing that I put on this plan was a summary from the notice of intent, which just outlines that we will have a construction management plan that we will be reviewing with Boston Transportation Department, and a construction period pollution prevention plan to outline all of the erosion and sediment control measures, as well as tracking and dust control. And the reason it's not a SWIP is because we are less than an acre, even including all of these offsite areas. We're about 26,000 square feet of disturbance overall. So the plan is to put a Jersey barrier at the limits of our work. And again, that'll be moving with different areas of construction. And we'll use a straw wattle at the base of those because all of our areas adjacent are pavement. So we won't be able to, stake hay bales and silt fence like you would see on a grass site. We are putting filter bags in all of the existing catch basins, cleaning. As part of the filing, you'll see a stormwater management report, which includes this construction management plan, and it includes all the details of when those have to be replaced and cleaned out for that and for the straw wattles. Next slide. Lastly, this slide just shows you all the additional utility connections that will be required to serve this building. Right now, as a garage, it doesn't require as much utility service, especially tel data and electrical service. So we have a new electric service in the alley that goes to the alley at the end of this row of buildings. And other documents that you're going to find in the filing is the BPDA climate resiliency report, the stormwater management report with construction period pollution prevention plan, and a geotechnical report and other plans from the plan set with details on the stormwater system that's under slab, architectural plans, and the landscaping plans. And that concludes this summary of the project.
Okay, great, thank you. Just want to remind members of the public to provide public comment, please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you're calling in and cannot use the platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 and *6 to unmute yourself. Send your questions to staff via email at cc@boston.gov or via Twitter by tagging the Twitter handle @BostonEnviro and using the hashtag ConcomHearing. Okay, Allison, were you able to talk to the BPDA? And I think, Paula, you sort of foreshadowed this. We do have some questions regarding the BPDA being in the overlay district that you're in.
Yes.
Do you have anything? Go ahead, Allison. Thank you.
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Chair Parker. Yeah, I was able to speak with members of the BPDA resilience team earlier today, and they confirmed that, as the applicant said, this project has gone through the board in compliance with the Coastal Flood Resilience Zoning Overlay District. However, I would love to have a little more detail, if you could please, on what the wet and dry flood proofing strategies are for those lower elevation rooms, especially the mechanical rooms, the electrical rooms, as you said.
Jeff, Kim, are you able to take that question?
Sure. So I guess as for the dry proofing strategy, I think for our first approach is to raising the first floor by 2 feet. Then we are, on top of that, we are raising our window sill from the street level another 2.5 feet. So the bottom of the dry proofing for the building is about 4.5 feet from the street elevation. And we think that that's probably the maximum that we can go without destroying the public well. I think you want to be able to see the inside of the building when you're walking on the street and have that connection. So that's the dry proofing that we are trying to provide, is 4.5 feet from the street elevation. But that still doesn't meet the design elevation for the Boston. So for additional 2 feet, we are going to try to provide affordable barriers when that happens, to raise anything that's over 4.5 feet. I think for the dry proofing, I think we are going to provide structural members along the window jambs. So in the future, we can the technology is pretty new, so there aren't that many products out there for the portable dry proofing, but we are going to provide a structural infrastructure so we can, when that time comes, we can provide something to raise that dry proofing elevations to 6.5 feet.
And if I
And
could
as-
follow up, are you planning any seals on the electrical room doors or any other interior stop gaps? Or are you relying on the deployables in those instances?
Our electrical rooms are raised up additional 2 feet from the ground elevation as well. And talking to Eversource, they don't want their the niche to be higher than the elevation that we are providing. So that's what we're going to provide the main electrical gears at the elevation that Eversource requested. For our actual electrical room is actually raised additional 2 feet from the vault or the niche to meet the code required elevation height. So that's the elevation that we are providing. Those two electrical elements are by maximum that we can provide per code.
Okay. And one more question, Chair Parker. Your plans indicated a fuel oil space. Is that a relic on the plan?
It's
Or-
not. Actually, we do have a fuel storage room.
Okay.
Fuel storage in the room needs to be, we cannot raise that fuel storage up because they have to refill that tank. But the tank itself is self-sealed. There's not going to be there's no chance that there's a flooding, any oil can come out. We're also going to anchor the tank to the floor slab. So in case of flooding, it's not going to flow away.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. What is the total increase impervious surface here?
It's pretty much exactly as existing conditions. We're not, I mean, we haven't included our permeable pavers and our tree pits, but there are some existing tree pits there, so we haven't taken any credit for that. We've just said we're impervious hasn't increased because it's pretty much all impervious today.
Okay, can you talk about the trees? There are a number of trees on the site now. What are the plans for the trees? Any new trees planned to be planted?
Yeah, so there's 4 calorie pears right now along the frontage. They're not in great condition, so our landscape architect does recommend removing them. Plus, obviously they're subject to damage during construction. So we are going to remove those 4, and we are replanting with American hornbeam. And then there is, and I don't know all the species, but there is a planting plan as part of the set that talks about what the understory is with shrubs and ground cover.
Okay, I'll let Commissioner Wilson follow up on that. And there was a question about more details on the means of construction. Allison, I don't know if you had anything else on that, or the concerns you have been answered.
I think they were answered in the presentation. Thank you.
I agree. Okay, Commissioner Sullivan?
Did I hear you say you were raising the sidewalk up to elevation 14? And if so, what's the elevation today?
Yes, so right now the street where the garage is accessed is about elevation 13. So we are slightly regrading the road just along that curb line to bring that up to elevation 13.5. And then we have a 6-inch curb, so it brings us up to about elevation 14. At the low side, the door would be low right now where the garage enters. So it doesn't get raised a lot. It ranges from 13 where there's the driveway to 13.8, and we're now going up to 14. So it won't change, where we tie in on either 2 sides, but it helps get those doors up and gets the first floor up.
All right. Is this a public way or a private way?
So it's a public, private way
Open to public travel.
to public, yes.
Yeah, I think you may need to get that grade changed with Public Improvement Commission. So you should
Yeah,
just-
I talked to Todd about that, so we will touch base with him again.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, that was the only question I had.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Guerin?
I'm going to defer to Mike on the issues around the landscaping. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Wilson, all eyes on
Oh,
you.
gee. Yeah, I was gonna say building building up the tension. Yeah, no, I mean, I guess that site, I was just trying to pull up Google Earth to see, because I've obviously seen water pouring down Sleeper Street before, and I wasn't sure sort of what the flooding history was for Farnsworth Street, whether it was similar in terms of the storms we had in like 2016-ish or something.
I'm not sure of the historical flooding. I'm not sure if the owner has any knowledge of the historical flooding at the garage.
Yeah, I can take that. This is John Needham, asset manager from BGO. So we own several buildings in this neighborhood, small portfolio. And so back during that bad storm, roughly 2016, as you mentioned, we owned 300 A Street at the time. We no longer own it now, but you know, that building sustained the worst flooding. As we all know, it's a couple steps down into the lobby. I actually remember watching the news and seeing our dumpster moving in the water. So that was a memorable moment for me.
Yeah.
Always
This
wondered whose
building-
dumpster that was. Okay.
What's that?
Always wondered whose dumpster that was.
Yeah, that was us out sitting at my house in Melrose watching the dumpster downtown move around. So that was great. Good stories for the family. But this garage did not sustain significant flooding, and we also at the time owned 12 Farnsworth Street across the way with the building with Flower on the ground floor. That building also did not sustain any damage from that storm.
Okay, yeah, no, that's helpful. I mean, I'm not seeing much of a grade difference, so it might have been sort of time, amount of flooding and that sort of thing. And obviously, yeah, the memory of that stuck with you, which is good, and I'm glad you were able to share that story. Yeah, I mean, I guess from what I remember of Hornbeam and what I'm looking up now is it's not particularly salt tolerant, but it is inundation somewhat tolerant, and wet soils are okay. It likes the shade, and I know that street is pretty well covered and it's small stature. So I mean, I'm okay deferring to the landscape architect that knows the site better than I do. You know, I think, you know, the likelihood of salt inundation on that site and the tree being the thing that we worry about is low. And so, I mean, I think, and you know, it's a reasonable planting choice for that spot. I guess, yeah, the sort of other comment, and this is sort of like more of a policy thing, is that we've seen a bunch of applications where the design flood elevation is sort of circumvented by the practical flood elevation relative to utility access. And I mean, hopefully that's something that sort of can be sorted out or better understood into the future, and recognize that, you know, sort of the one is an advisory and the other is, you know, they won't service your building. So, you know, we're sort of in tension there, but I think overall that the landscaping plan is reasonable, and, you know, the choices that have to be made in terms of the utilities are, you know, just what we're going to do today, and hopefully in the future we can sort of track to something that's a bit more of a universal standard rather than a practical standard.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Conan.
Thank you, Chair Parker. I don't have a lot of questions. So it's visually, it does help me to know that it's across the street from Flower, where I've been a lot. So I can, that I can understand. It's like really elevated, the building where Flower is, the base is elevated. And is this a comparable elevation when you say 14? Is that the same elevation or lower?
Trying to think of how much their front is raised. It's probably about 2 feet, maybe 2.5 feet over there. So maybe they're up to elevation 15. I can't say. I don't have a survey of that, that frontage.
Yeah, I remember wondering, what was the insight behind raising it that much over there? It seems like there's a lot of forethought that went into that, or I don't know what that led to that, but so it seems like this won't be up to that level. But if the water, it's interesting, Paula, you used the term historical flooding. I think what we're talking about with climate change is that's also our future. Right? That history is just going to repeat itself, unfortunately, many times over and only more intensely. And so given that, all that, well, let's say that there is the 14-foot elevation is exceeded by the flooding and it does come in. Along the lines of the wet proofing question that was asked earlier, will there be pumping of water out? Is that what you're setting up for?
So the first floor, so the sidewalk is at 14, but our first floor is up at 16. So we have steps and an elevator onto the first floor. So we do have another 2 feet from sidewalk grade up to the first floor.
Do you have any space below the first floor, like a basement?
No. No. So that entry area would be the only area that would need to be cleaned up from water damage. That's below 16.
I see. Okay. And in terms of the trees, it seems like if there is an unfortunate flooding after the saplings are planted, is there a plan to replant them if the saplings are affected?
BGO, I'm assuming you would be willing.
Yes, the answer is yes. There are 3 trees right now. We're gonna plant 4. So I just want to clarify that. So there are 3 deteriorated trees and we're going to replace them with 4 trees indigenous. And we also have planters at the side of the building along the base of the building. So it's a continuous planter which will have planting and vegetation. And we also have the terrace, the roof terrace, where we're going to have some planters that will also sort of, help with the heat island effect and consume some stormwater, evidently. So that's an improvement to the first question that Commissioner had. So it is an improvement, but we're not taking credit for it, but it is.
Thank you. Appreciate it. That's all, Chair Parker.
Sure.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Richmond, what do you have?
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions about where these electrical panels and other utilities are going to be at what level?
Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they're at elevation 18.
18, so that there's nothing below 18 as far as this building is concerned?
Nothing.
So our first floor is at 16, but the electrical room is higher so that we protect those utilities. And the panels are in the room higher than the ground, so they'll be up from the ground floor. I don't know if we have detailed elevations of the panels yet, but they will be above the floor elevation.
Okay, and the other question I had was about, I think somebody said something about fuel storage.
Yeah, so the fuel storage, Jeff, is for the generator, right?
It's for the emergency. We need to provide an emergency generator for life safety purpose. And the generator is on the rooftop. So we need to have a fuel tank on the ground floor so we can refill the tank. To access the tank, it's on the street elevation level, but they will be anchored to the ground. They will be anchored to the floor slab.
And what's in it, propane?
A diesel.
It's diesel?
Correct.
And why can't it be higher than that?
Because when you fill the tanks, when you fill those tanks from the street elevation, you don't want to pump it up. You want to have a gravity feed into the tank from the truck. So they want to have it on the street elevation. But the tank itself is sealed and it's anchored to the floor slab. So if in case of flooding, the tank won't float away or it'll leak any oil. So
it's going to have like a bathtub built around it. with a curb, and will have waterproofing, and will be a concrete curb going around, creating a bathtub for the tank for protection.
You know,
Is it
and
double walled?
Double walled, yes.
double walled. Okay, I mean, I think my problem with that is, you know, we keep seeing pictures from other places for sure in the country which had significant and unexpected, you know, storm water. And in those pictures, it's pretty clear that nothing that was supposed to stay where it stayed, or at least most of it didn't. So I'm just curious as to why you think this particular tank filled with diesel is going to stay where it is. How is it going to be anchored?
We are actually engineering the anchoring system for the tank. We're gonna actually calculate uplift from the flooding water and make sure that our anchor can withstand the uplifting pressure to stay anchored to the ground, so floor slab. So this is not a typical condition. I think there are a lot of buildings around Boston now that, you know, some high-rise buildings, they have tanks in the garage, underground garage, and this is how they typically address the tank issues, then make sure that it is anchored and make sure that it has enough anchorage to doesn't float away in case of flooding. So
I'm sorry though, I didn't hear what you say, and to be fair, I'm not really interested in other buildings. I'm only interested at the moment in yours. And how did you say you were going to anchor this tank?
we are going to calculate the uplift force from the flooding.
But how will it be anchored? What is it that you're going to anchor it by or with?
Well, they'll have a large anchor boards coming out. We're gonna, in case we're gonna embed the anchor boards into the concrete floor slab. The tank will be anchored.
Say that again. I didn't understand what you said.
We're gonna embed, when we cast the floor slab, we're gonna put these anchors within the floor slab and tie it into a concrete reinforcing in the floor slab. And then we'll put the tank on top and anchor that tank with the bolts to the floor slab. So it will be tied to the structure of the floor slab of the building.
And at what level is this diesel tank going to be?
It's at the street elevation,
And what level is that, please?
14.
14 feet. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Herbst.
Yeah, I wanted to understand how you are addressing our regulations for redevelopment standards in land subject to coastal storm flowage that require that activity will result in an improvement in existing conditions over the capacity of land subject to storm flowage to protect at least one resource area. I'm not sure that I saw that addressed in the
It is in the filing.
Okay.
We addressed each of the standards in the filing. Stacy, that would be great if you can.
I'm sorry if I missed it, but could you say basically how you are improving conditions?
Sure, and I'm just going to start describing it from the top of my head, but I'm also kind of navigating through the notice of intent to find the more specific information. But and Commissioner, do you mind just restating your question? So with regard to how we're meeting the redevelopment standards to improve the existing conditions of the floodplain, right?
Well, the language, essentially that, improving the conditions of the floodplain for their capacity to protect at least one resource area.
Yep. So, I mean, in general, obviously the building as it is right now is not resilient to flooding. And I think all of the things that Paula and that have been discussed here in terms of the resiliency that's being incorporated is really the main way that that's being addressed, because it's moving from a building that is, you know, street level or lower, not at all resilient, to one that meets the various criteria that the city has outlined with regard to resiliency. So that's the main, you know, very brief, and we can talk more about that. I think that other improvements which relate a little bit less to the floodplain resource area itself, but are worth noting, are some that Bentall Green Oak and Paula had mentioned in terms of, you know, replacing the non-native trees with a native species and some of the planters and the permeable paver and things like that. Also with the stormwater management system, and Paula, jump in if I'm incorrect, but I believe that's going to result in an improvement over existing conditions with regard to stormwater management. So those are kind of off the top of my head, and those were summarized in the notice of intent narrative.
And again, I'm sorry I missed it, but I do think that actually the relevant ones are the later ones you referenced, because the language of our ordinance or our regulations are about protecting resource areas, not so much the building, although we're glad you are improving that protection. So I think if you're making stormwater improvements, I think frankly, the pavers, the trees are probably pretty minuscule effect. So I'd be interested to know about the stormwater improvements, or if Commissioner Sullivan had any comments, or whether that was satisfactory to him.
Commissioner Sullivan?
We look at all this and these guys and what we do.
Commissioner Sullivan, we're not.
Yeah,
at least I'm not hearing you.
Yeah, your internet's a little sketchy there. Do you want to type it in the chat?
Give me the question again. I'll see if it's going to be a long. All right.
Well, basically, the proponent is saying that their improvement to the resource area is in stormwater improvements over current conditions, and I wondered about your perspective on that.
Well, it's an improvement in that we're taking care of GCOT requirements. We're also.
Sorry, we're not hearing you.
Yeah.
So that's.
I think the answer is yes. I might have to find out later what it is, but.
Paula, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, so under existing conditions, and there is no stormwater management. So for us, providing this sub-slab system, it's going to take all the roof area and get it into the ground. It's going to help the area surrounding, because everything's on piles still existing. So it's going to help definitely GCOD and recharge of groundwater and reducing the flow off the site. All the water just goes out into Farnsworth Street, connects into the BWSC drainage system, and flows out to the 4-point channel. With this, at least we'll be able to infiltrate some, and then overflow will go in the same direction it goes today.
And it sounds like Commissioner Sullivan is quite satisfied with what you did. So,
Yes.
So I
said
appreciate
it much
that.
better than he could have.
And again, apologies if I missed it in the presentation, but I'm glad to have it clarified. Thank you.
And one other thing, if I may just jump in on the first part, because I agree, Commissioner Herbst, that protection of the building in and of itself isn't necessarily addressing the redevelopment for the resource areas, but in this case where it's an existing parking garage that's subject to flooding, and it will be replaced by a building that's resilient and has been designed so that the features in it that could cause pollution won't be causing pollution, as opposed to the existing condition now. I think that resiliency does play into the floodplain resource areas a bit for this particular site.
Okay, thank you.
And I didn't clarify that when I was explaining.
Thanks. And I also just noted that you proposed a very small amount of pervious paving, and I'm just wondering, is that going to be maintained? Is there any particular purpose to such a small amount?
So that's a Boston typical standard. They like to have that 18-inch strip. I think we have a 20-inch strip. So that's kind of a new standard that they're going to try to incorporate in all their sidewalks. So it's brick right now, and we're going to go to the concrete. So it's going to be more ADA accessible, and then the strip. So I think you're going to be seeing all the sidewalks kind of go to this same format.
Are we going to be seeing anybody maintain these little strips?
That's a question for John.
John, yes, we will.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Allison, any raised hands? I don't see any.
No, not seeing any.
Okay, so with that, I would entertain a motion to close the hearing.
So moved.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Sullivan?
And I have moved on to another machine so I can speak freely now. Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Gearon,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson,
Aye.
Commissioner Conan,
Aye.
Commissioner Richmond,
I'm really unhappy about that. Yeah, I'm going to abstain.
okay. Commissioner Herbst?
Aye.
I vote aye, so that passes 6-0 with one abstention. Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is a notice of intent for DEP file number 0061911 and Boston file number 2023-002 from Niche Engineering on behalf of Seaport Square Development Company LLC for the proposed roadway improvements, including roadway widening, median installation, plantings, utility adjustments, electrical pole construction, and electrical conduit installation located at Congress Street, West Service Road, Boston Wharf Road, and the Summer Street Bridge in South Boston. Resource areas land subject to coastal storm flowage. Who's here on behalf of the applicant?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is John Schmidt with Niche Engineering. And with me is Dan Sullivan, Development Manager from WS Development. I'm going to let Dan give you an overview of generally what the project is and how we ended up here.
Great, thank you.
Hi all, Dan Sullivan. I work with WS Development in the Seaport. Thank you very much again for your time this evening. As you may know, WS has been building the Seaport neighborhood for a few years now, and in connection with that work, we're taking on reconstruction of several streets. Today, we're presenting those street improvements to Boston Wharf Road, West Service Road, and small portions of Congress Street and the Summer Street Bridge. The scope will be in the public right-of-way, but this project is being permitted, designed, and built by WS with possibly some state funds. Since we're the beginning of this project, we've engaged with the City of Boston and Mass DOT as partners throughout the design development. We're looking forward to bringing some more beauty and energy into this space with a median with plantings and trees and Congress Street and bike lanes and Boston Wharf Road and West Service Road. And our plans to begin the work in this spring in West Service Road. So with that, I'll hand it back to John Schmidt with Niche to present the design as it relates to the Conservation Commission.
Thank you, Dan. Next slide, please. Now, can you go, we're missing a slide. Can you go back one? There we go. So primarily the brunt of this work is along West Service Road and Boston Wharf Road and Congress Street. You may recall Block N, which is on at the intersection of West Service Road and Congress Street is under construction and got an order of conditions from this commission 2 years ago. And to the right, Block L5, which is also in construction, received an order of conditions from this commission about 1.5 years ago. The area in purple is the area subject to coastal storm flowage. Next slide, please. And this is the Summer Street Bridge, which is actually elevated about 20 feet above the floodplain. But just to ensure that we captured everything that may be of interest to the commission, we included this in our application. But the Summer Street Bridge is undergoing bridge improvements. That includes construction of a median and some sidewalk improvements that improve the pedestrian access and accessibility. Next slide, please. As far as introducing some greenscape to the project, we are proposing the reconstruction of the Congress Street median that fall between blocks L5, L6, and parcel N and P. Within this median, which is currently all impervious concrete, we are proposing 11 green ash trees, 25 shrubs, and some grasses and perennials. It's going to be similar in the nature to what you've seen over on Seaport Boulevard in the last couple of years with the median improvements that were conducted over there. Again, it's going to tie the entire Seaport Square together and show continuity between the different parcels. Next slide, please. As far as the scope of work goes, this is West Service Road, where we're proposing cold plane and overlay, some curb replacement, some minor sidewalk reconstruction in the area that's in front of the Postal Service parking lot. And then the areas to the right that fall within, in front of parcel N, that was again permitted through your commission in the PIC a couple of years ago. Next slide, please. Here at the intersection of West Service Road and Boston Wharf Road, we're proposing new crosswalks, as well as cold planing or cold milling and overlay, and new traffic signal improvements as well. Next slide, please. And as we, next slide, please. As we progress down towards Seaport Boulevard, it's a cold plan and overlay, some accessible ramps. And then the highlighted area in the bottom left, that's parcel L3, which will be the minor improvements done there, but that when that parcel comes to design, we'll be back, we'll actually you're outside the club. We'll be permitting that through the Public Improvement Commission and coordinating with Kate England as to the green infrastructure that will be incorporated into that parcel. Next slide, please. This again is a view of the improvements on Congress Street, where in this application, it's really just the median itself, but to the north of Congress Street, that's parcel L5, which is not yet started design, but when we start that design, we'll be coordinating green infrastructure with Kate England as well as with the Public Improvement Commission. This application is presently before the public. We're in the process of going through Public Improvement Commission permitting. We've done the notifications. We still have several agencies to hear from, but we hope to be on new business in late January and February and have the permits in hand by the end of February. As far as erosion controls for this work, again, this work is all within the public right of way, primarily curb to curb. So we'll be incorporating silk sacks in the catch basins. Trenches will be plated. We'll do street sweeping as you know on a daily basis. We're going to be using rubber tires as not to damage the asphalt, and no materials will be stored within the floodplain area. Maintenance for this project at the end of the day will be the responsibility of the Boston Public Works and Boston Water and Sewer, because again, this work is all within the existing public way. And that concludes my presentation.
Great. Thank you, John. Okay, just want to remind members of the public to provide public comment. Please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you're calling in and cannot use the platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 and *6 to unmute yourself. Send your questions to staff via email at cc@boston.gov or via Twitter by tagging the Twitter handle @BostonEnviro and using the hashtag #ConComHearing. Okay, just a couple quick questions. Are existing trees being removed?
There are no existing trees that are being removed, but we are proposing 11 new trees as part of this application.
Okay, and I'll let Commissioner Wilson handle follow-up questions on, it looks like you're planting ash trees, and maybe he or Allison have some other recommendations. So with that, I go to Commissioner Sullivan.
Hey, John, on the trees and then any of the bump outs, you mentioned you're going to go to PIC, talk to Kate England. Are those trees going to be taking any street water for green infrastructure?
That was actually part of the conversation with Kate. And unfortunately, the median is the high point of the roadway. So everything slopes away from the median. So that's not really available. That isn't available for this application. So unfortunately, no street water will be going into the median.
Right. Is there anywhere that you're proposing to do it? Like when you had some of the bump outs in the sidewalks? I couldn't really tell.
There are really no bump outs on the sidewalks. They're pretty much maintaining the curb line. If I'm scrolling back here, except for where we have in crosswalk for that's all encompassed by ramp.
Right.
Yeah. But in a conversation with Kate, we are committed to incorporating the green infrastructure when we advance the design of parcel L3 and L5, and at that point we will be seriously consider taking the tree boxes to collect stormwater and providing some infiltration along the existing public sidewalks.
Yeah, because I think it gets important when we say any of these public improvements, although constructed by a private, will be maintained by the public entities. The PIC may say, yeah, we'll have this other public entity do it, and they didn't agree to it. Yet
Well,
the
you know,
contract-
yeah, what I anticipate, and I'm sure WS does as well, is the median where the tree plantings are will be maintained by WS because they don't necessarily they don't want that to fall into disrepair because it's,
Yeah.
reflects their district. The rest of the maintenance is, catch basin cleaning and sidewalk, street sweeping, typical Boston Public Works and, repair, maintenance duties.
I got, that's what I want to make sure everyone knows. If you haven't got your PIC orders yet, when street trees go in, only God knows who's going to be maintaining them.
And WS is committed to maintaining the infrastructure for all the buildings that they've built to date. So when we get to L3 and L5, they will own the maintenance of the sidewalks in front of their building. But really, we look to the city to maintain the roadway and the public storm drainage.
Right. Okay. That's all I had.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Garin?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, so these trees and the other landscaping will be planted in the median. And then after the project ends, who'll be taking care of these trees? What kind of,
WS will be committed to maintaining the landscaping in the median, similar to they do to the landscaping on Seaport Boulevard.
Okay, and I'll defer to Mike Wilson regarding management of the ashes. So take it away, Mike.
Okay, great. Commissioner Wilson, you're on the spot again.
I'm glad I made it to the meeting.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess one thing I was just kind of curious about is, I know we're talking about the streetscape at this meeting, but I was wondering if you might be able to elaborate a little bit more on like how this, it seems very discreet from what you guys are planning for the rest of Harbor Way in the WS parcels. And I just wanted to get a sense of like how those two things tied together relative to maybe some of the earlier concepts that we were shown.
So I think, and I can't speak to, and maybe Dan can jump in if I misspeak, but I think the median at Congress Street reflects what WS has proposed in the past and is also constructed on Seaport Boulevard. Again, when we design and permit parcel L6, which is the last remaining parcel on Congress Street, and L3, which is the last remaining parcel on Boston Wharf Road, we will at that point, those sidewalks will be designed in a manner that will meet the complete street requirements, and as well as Kate England's desire for more green infrastructure, as well as the Parks Department's requirements for various planting materials.
And I would just add that the median connects the Summer Street steps. Maybe that's what you're referencing. That brings you right into Harbor Way. And when L5 construction is complete, mid 2024, that public space Harbor Way will be open. So the connection from the streets to Harbor Way will be there, and that this median on Congress connects those two.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, the crosswalk median. Sorry.
No, that's good for some context, because I think, yeah, it's one thing to be permitting a streetscape set of trees versus like this plugs very immediately into what is a cohesive public space as well. So I guess in terms of the planting plan and stuff like that, I was wondering if you'd had a chance to sort of reflect on some of the other plantings that have been done, maybe closer to Fan Pier and up there, that the plantings had not been quite as successful. I don't know if that was a WS project necessarily, but I know that they've come before us within the 3 years of compliance, and those plantings had failed.
Right. So the WS has learned a lot about the plantings out here in the soil types, and James Corner Field Operation, JCFO, the landscaper of record, not only for the Seaport Boulevard improvements, but for the work at 88 Seaport Boulevard and the L5 parcel and the parcel L, N, and P they've been working in this area now for 5 or 6 years, and they've used that experience to improve the landscape design to ensure that the trees are going to be successful. And you can, they've got, actually, I think WS has in the past year replaced a number of those trees that have failed in Seaport Boulevard, in the Seaport area.
Okay, no, that's good to hear that the learning loop's closed. In terms of like the planting details, plant selections and like that, has that changed over time as well? Or I'm just trying to understand because and it sort of pressed doubt the first time and then you sort of pressed ahead.
Yeah,
I failed. So
I'm not the landscape architect and not available tonight, so I cannot speak to you to the
No,
history.
no, fair enough. They weren't available last time either.
But as as we said, we're in the process of going through the Public Improvement Commission, and we're waiting feedback from the Parks Department on this planting plan. And whatever feedback they have, we are certainly happy to entertain that and address the drawings accordingly. And as the order of conditions will require, prior to construction, we'll be submitting copies of the final design documents and permanent documents and happy to review those with the commission and the commission's agents to ensure that everything is done properly and to your satisfaction.
Okay, no, appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just, I would, given the plant selection that you're putting forth, I would express extreme skepticism as to the choice, whether things have been improved. And again, I would like JCFO to actually come to the meeting and, present its work. And last time that helped to understand why they had made decisions that were rather hard to explain and then failed. So I think we got to do that all over again.
Understood. They're also available to meet with you offline to have this conversation with you to assure that your concerns are met.
Yeah, this is the last remaining public space within the Seaport. WS is a major landholder. It's been doing a great job. The streetscape has always suffered and really has been an afterthought for over and over again. And it's kind of frustrating that we're back where we were before.
Yeah,
Sorry,
Commissioner
Josh.
Wilson. Yeah, no, that's okay. Commissioner Wilson, so if we have a condition in there that the landscaping plan will be presented before construction to be approved by the commission, that would be the leverage to get the landscape architect to come in and talk about the plan. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I would argue for a continuance. I would not argue for administrative approval on this one.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting administrative approval. I'm suggesting Concom approval. So we have two flavors of that. One is administrative approval. The other is actually coming in front of the Concom to present it.
Oh,
I'm sorry, you're muted.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I would argue for coming in front of the Concom again.
Yep. At the later date, though, not continuing this particular hearing.
Well, I would not approve it for the tree species that they've specified absent any additional information as to why those were chosen and why this landscape would succeed when others have failed.
Okay, that sounds like a continuance to me.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
and other commissions may feel differently.
Yep, understood. Okay. Commissioner Conan?
So Chair Parker, this is actually a question for you, and I'm curious to know if the landscape plan and planting plan, however it's affected after the proponent goes to the PIC, is something that we should see before we can confidently say anything.
Yeah, we do. In the condition, they do come back and give us the final landscaping plan.
I see. Okay, so I'd be curious to see that. And in terms of green infrastructure, this may be already covered because I know Kate England's name has been mentioned a few times here. And I think there's other conversations may have been had along those lines, but Did I hear that because the median is the highest point in the street, there is no room for green infrastructure like a rain garden or something?
Because the median is the high point of the street, there is no way to get roadway runoff to the median because the water sheets away from the high point to the gutters on Congress Street.
Right, that means you can't have the green infrastructure in the median, but you can have it elsewhere where the water does go down?
Yes, you can, but those projects are have already been designed and constructed and permitted through the Public Improvement Commission as well as this commission.
So it's too late for those areas.
But we will be back for parcel L6, which we will incorporate those requests as well as parcel L5.
And L6 is the last one you said?
There's two parcels left in this block, L6 and L5. L6 is at the corner of.
Sorry, John, it's L6 and L3.
I'm sorry, L6 and L3, I apologize.
Yeah, so L6 is on Congress Street, so that'll come into play with what you're talking about.
Right.
With the runoff will come into the.
That is good to know, that there is a place where we can be proactive about this. And that'll be an opportunity for us to be proactive about this. And in terms of the trees and the lessons learned in continuation of Commissioner Wilson's point here, I think the green infrastructure, I'm not sure, you can tell me if this is not the case, the green infrastructure conversations that you're having with the city, are they just general green infrastructure anywhere in the city or green infrastructure on the coast? Because this particular space, I mean, anything in the coastal neighborhood, but South Boston in particular, we've seen, Seaport in particular, we've seen is subject to flooding. So is the green infrastructure conversation in the context of being flooded with water from the harbor, which is salt water, or is it a general green infrastructure conversation?
It's general in the sense that we're providing the pervious paver, for the previous parcels that have been through this process, providing the pervious pavers that allow for, sidewalk infiltration. Both buildings, all the buildings out there are meeting the capture and reuse and recharge requirements that were, the requirement at the time, either 1 inch or 1 1/4 inches. So, I'm not sure, I'm not aware of any differences between a coastal impact versus an inland impact.
Okay. Thank you. That's all, Chair Parker.
Thank you. Commissioner Richmond, what do you have?
Sorry, yeah, I was on mute. Yeah, I think I'm more or less where Commissioner Wilson is. And I'm, it seems to me that we don't do again what didn't work before. And so I think I would be in support of continuing this hearing.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Herbst?
Yeah, I guess I would also express support. And I also just wanted to, our land subject to coastal storm flowage language is relatively new, and there is language in here about the improvement and in terms of the grass and plantings. I'll note that it's about 1.5% of the work on the site. So, we may be, I don't know if it's this project or if it's practical here, but at some point, I think we'll have to have conversations about what constitutes improvement. And perhaps that would be related to the conversation with the landscaper when they come in, whether other things are possible. Thanks.
Okay. Commissioner Wilson did have another question about perspective, and I'm sorry, now I just lost the email regarding, I'm so sorry, I lost it's gone.
No,
Commissioner Wilson, go ahead.
I think it would just be helpful to sort of get a sense of the conversations that are happening between private developers and the city on multiple fronts, and where we sit within the permitting chain. And then there's the PIC, and Kate England's opinion is being entered into it's just very hard to track all of what's going on and whose vision is what and who's responsible for what. And I'm sure, yeah,
I share in that.
I'm sure we can all second that, right? So,
painful.
If we could get everybody around the same table, maybe at once when it's ready to go, and we all understand and we're not sort of nitpicking at different parts of the plan, because we all have our own limited jurisdiction or perspective on it, that would be helpful. And I think that's something that the landscape architect can help facilitate. And also get the Parks Department or whoever is going to be sort of owning, maintaining, stewarding, whatever the term is for what the space will be for its sustainment, would be helpful.
Great point. Okay, Allison, I don't see any hands raised. Did I miss anyone?
I'm not seeing anyone either.
Okay, so I think the message was loud and clear. I'd like to have an appearance by the landscape architect. So with that, I would entertain a motion to continue the hearing.
So moved.
Second,
Thank you, Commissioner Sullivan,
Aye.
Commissioner Guerin,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson,
Aye.
Commissioner Conan,
Aye.
Commissioner Richmond,
aye.
Commissioner Herbst,
Aye.
and I vote aye. That carries 7-0. Okay, thank you, John.
So we'll continue to the February 1st. Is that the continuance date?
Yeah, you can
Yeah.
get the landscape architect available. Yeah,
Okay,
that'd be great.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is from Notice of Intent for DEP file number 0061900 from Niche Engineering, Inc. on behalf of DIV Black Falcon LLC for the proposed 3-floor addition to an existing building, the expansion of the existing parking lot and other associated improvements located at 88 Black Falcon Avenue in South Boston. Resource areas are land subject to coastal storm flowage and 100-foot buffer to coastal bank. I'm going to recuse myself from this hearing because my firm represents the Davis Company, who is part of the ownership team here, not on this project, but on other issues. With that, before I go, Commissioner Herbst, I'm going to do a little housekeeping for you during the hearing. Just want to remind members of the public to provide public comment, please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you're calling in and cannot use the platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 and *6 to unmute yourself. Send your questions to staff via email at cc@boston.gov or via Twitter by tagging the Twitter handle @BostonEnviro and using the hashtag #ConcomHearing. I hope that was helpful for you. And with that, I would entertain a motion to appoint Commissioner Herbst acting chair for this hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Do we have a second? Thank you. Commissioner Sullivan,
Aye.
Commissioner Guerin, Commissioner Wilson,
Aye.
Commissioner Conan,
Aye.
Commissioner Richmond,
Aye.
Commissioner Herbst,
Aye.
and I enthusiastically vote aye. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. So the project has been announced. Who's here to present it?
Good evening, Commissioners. John Schmidt with Niche Engineering. It's a pleasure to spend my evening with you. And with me is Juan Lovelock from Massport, who would like to say hello, and then Chris Chandler from the Davis Company. So I'll give you an overview before I get into the technical components.
Okay,
And
thank you.
Brad Washburn's also here from Massport.
So would Brad or Juan like to say anything?
John, before you beat me to the punch, I was going to say thank you to Commissioner Herbst and the rest of the commission for having us here tonight. Again, we're just joined by Chris and John, which John already said. And we're happy to, after they walk through their few slides and brief presentation, we're available for any questions you may have. So thanks again. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad, and commissioners, thank you. We're anxious to turn this right back to John for more airtime. Chris Chandler, SVP at the Davis Companies. We are the proponent with Massport on 88 Black Falcon. This is a Massport property that we control through a long-term ground lease that extends out till 2098. We have had the rights to that ground lease since about 2017, and during that time, we've been working on a project which you'll see here from John. That project currently does have BPDA and BCDC board approval back in 2021. We've completed our MEPA process with the state, got our FEIR, and have been working on a lengthy process jointly, obviously on everything with Massport, on a waterfront development plan with Mass DEP, and now our Chapter 91 license. So that's kind of our last major bucket here, which is what's brought us to the Conservation Commission. We have a couple of other minor permits, FAA, because we're in the flight path, some FEMA flood map issues, but this project is coming down what has been a very lengthy permitting process. We were before you last fall on some minor electrical upgrades, so hopefully you remember that and had some familiarity with that. This is now a separate notice of intent for the full development. We still have a ways to go with design, obviously, and finishing our permitting process, but this will be a major milestone for us to get to an order of conditions with the Conservation Commission. So we're looking forward to that. And I will turn it over to John to present all of the project and technical information. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Next slide, please. So here's a beautiful rendering of the proposed addition. It's a vertical addition, a 4-story addition, which is in the red material, over the existing 3-story building. And also the 2nd-story parking deck, as you can see, is going to be extended 2 bays to the right, which you can see as you look at that detail at that rendering. So essentially the project entirely, the brunt of the project is a vertical expansion of the existing building, but we are also doing a lot of infrastructure and accessibility improvements, which I'll get into at grade. Next slide, please. As you can see, this is a pier. The site is, majority of the site is on pier. There's some limited terra firma at the western end of the site, and it is within the 100-year floodplain. The 100-year floodplain is on Boston City basis around 18.6. The site at grade varies between 17.5 and about 19 feet. So the at grade we are at a floodplain elevation. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the plan where we can see that this is to give you a sort of perspective of the improvements that we're proposing all at the westerly end of the site. A majority of the improvements are at grade or at the westerly end of the site. And as everything right to the building face is essentially on pier. Would you mind going back to the original slide, the original rendering? Thank you. So the existing building, which was built many years ago, the first floor elevation on that is 22.8, which is great because the design flood elevation as determined by the BPDA at 2070 is 21.5. So even at 2070, with the first floor of the building will be above the flood conditions. And all the proposed utility improvements, the electrical vault, things like that, we're going to be raised to the first floor or higher. So there's nothing that is going to be proposed below grade, at grade or below grade. And I also like to state that under the existing first floor slab at 22.8 is crawl space. So there's really nothing happening under the building. There's nothing to be concerned about being protected because it's basically a crawl space under the building. Can we go ahead 2 slides, please? Next slide. So this site, as you know, is an active port. The cruise terminal operates, seasonally during cruise season, and that's on the west. I'm sorry, can you go back 1 slide? I apologize. I'm just trying to tell my story here. So the cruise terminal is an active cruise terminal on the bottom of the sheet, and that works during cruise season. On the harbor side, north of the site, that is also active because we have coastal concrete that receives material barges all the time that dock there and then serve the concrete facility. So the challenge with this project is building a 4-story addition as well as doing at-grade site improvements while keeping all the operations functioning. And JMA has come up with a construction management plan, which I've shared with the commission, demonstrating that we can do this without having piers in the water. Essentially, they're going to work on the existing building and go up. So there will be no impacts to the marine pier operations or the port operations are surrounding the site. Can you go ahead 2 slides, please? Okay, let's go back. I'm sorry. So I'm sorry, I'm making you crazy. So here's a rendering. Right now, the site is completely impervious, and as I said, it's a functioning functioning port operations. There's a lot of traffic in and out, serving fish operations, other marine type operations, as well as a cruise terminal. These two, we are proposing some landscaping in the areas that allow it while still maintaining these operations. The slide to the left is at the intersection of the proposed new driveway and Dry Dock Ave. And this shows a landscaping area that at that intersection. And then the slide to the right is about halfway between that intersection and the new building, where we have planters that are in planting beds. And the reason why these beds are there, movable planting beds. And the reason for that is during cruise operations, these trees have to be removed temporarily or set aside so traffic can flow through the site unimpeded. There is a lot of traffic that serves this facility during cruise operations. You have buses, you have cabs, you have people dropping off passengers. So this is really, this slide to the right is, that will happen outside of season. During the season, those things will be set aside outside of the path of travel, so the pier operations can continue as intended. But as far as a site that has no landscaping, we are proposing 14 canopy trees, and I can't speak to the tree material, and I apologize for that. And then we have another 29 multi-stem trees. So we're providing a lot, and 32 evergreens. So there's a lot of trees coming in here, as well as vegetated growth, as you can see in these renderings. There's also a lot of some public amenities that are coming with this. We're improving the harbor walk around the entire, around the perimeter of the site. Right now, it's just a painted line, so that's being improved. So public access is improved. We will have 2 lookout areas. There's one existing lookout area at the end of the pier, but we're gonna have a second lookout area along on the second floor roof deck that just gives you a better view of the entire harbor. In addition, we're gonna have an elevator, exterior elevator access that allows pedestrians to go in the elevator and access the second floor garage deck without having to enter into the building. Next slide, please. So again, this is the planting plan that I spoke to, that the renderings were there. You can see the movable planters to the right of the dash line. Those things can be moved during pier cruise operations. And the plantings to the left are permanent. And then to the right, you can see where the elevator, proposed elevator bank is by where the crosswalk intersects. And there's some permanent plantings proposed over there as well. Next slide, please. This work also includes intersection improvements because we are rebuilding the driveway and removing the intersection. Right now, if you're familiar with the area, there's a ramp that starts at Dry Dock Ave and goes up to the building, to the second floor garage, the second floor parking deck. That ramp is being reconstructed and is going to run parallel to the garage, so traffic will be improved. Vehicles will pull into the driveway and then take a right where you can see that first crosswalk in the drawing as you go down, and that will be a ramp up to the second floor deck. And then in the area where we have the existing ramp now, we will be expanding the parking for operations for Black Falcon operations. And you can see a small box too, that is Coastal Concrete. Not a part of this application, but will be part of future application. Is part of this work requires us to reconstruct the Coastal Concrete building up head house, so to speak. So that's something that we'll be coming back to you with in the future. These things are all tied together. Next slide, please. So as far as utility improvements go, right now there's all the stormwater on the site just goes in catch basins and discharges into the harbor, and the building, as well as the building roof runoff discharges directly into the harbor. We are proposing stormwater collection and recharge for the area of the terra firma that we are disturbing for this project. And that consists of about 46,000 square feet of terra firma. We're collecting 1¼ inches of stormwater runoff and recharging 4,700 cubic feet of stormwater in a 550 linear feet of 42-inch perforated pipe. And that's what that rectangle structure is that's under the proposed driveway. We are also going to be relocating the master meter, which is currently in the middle of the intersection at Fan Pier, the master water meter, which is at the middle of the intersection of Dry Dock and Black Falcon Ave. We'll be pulling that into the parking lot. So that will improve access for Boston Water and Sewer when they need to get into that manhole and inspect it, and other people as well. We also will be running a new electrical service and a new sanitary sewer service, and some other minor utility improvements, new catch basins with deep sumps, that sort of stuff. I'd also like to say that, next slide, please. This is our erosion control, which is because we will not have any, we're not dependent on barges to build this building. We'll be able to contain the project in a nice fenced area for erosion control that can capture any runoff and any blown materials during construction. And I'd also like to note that the design is compliant with Massport's floodproofing guidelines, and it's also compliant with Massport sustainability and resiliency standard guidelines. And I think I'm running through my notes, and I think I've captured everything that I wanted to share with you. So with that, we're open to questions.
Okay, thank you, John. Allison, do you have any comments before I turn it over to the commissioners?
No, I don't really have anything on this. Just would love to hear about a little bit more about landscaping, but I think you went into more detail on that in the presentation.
Okay, and I'll just remind folks that this is, because it's Massport property, it's not subject to our ordinance, so I won't be asking about your compliance with that. Okay, John, questions?
Yeah, John, did you say that even the meter pit and all that is done actually on Massport property and not City of Boston property?
So right now, the existing meter pit is in the roadway layout.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was out there last spring with one of your, with Marty. And he, at that point, he said, if it's feasible, can you possibly, because we don't anticipate increasing that meter size, we feel it's sufficient for the needs of the addition. But he asked if we could relocate that meter into the parcel and get it out of the middle of the intersection. So that is something we're proposing as part of this project.
Right, that is on Massport property itself.
It will be, yes.
Yeah. Help me out with the trees that you're going to shuffle around all the time.
So these are going to be tree boxes, you know, as you can see in that rendering, if they're tree boxes, and, you know, it's going to provide some shade. And, you know, probably I would say 8 months out of the year, maybe 6 months out of the year, it'll be there. And then when a cruise comes in and they need to increase the vehicular access through the parcel, those will be picked up and set aside to provide a nice clean path of travel for vehicles. So they, because there's a lot of vehicles that come down in this area during the cruise season.
Yeah, I guess my question is, when is it the middle of winter we move these around, or is it the middle of summer when we need shade? We move them around.
You know,
it's really
Chris, you can speak.
Yeah, and Massport can jump in on this if they want to, but the heaviest cruise season, Commissioner, is September and October, when we see the highest cruise volume here. But the cruise season really does run probably 8 months out of the year. It just peaks in August, September, October. So that's when we would see most of the movement. But anytime there's a ship dock at the cruise terminal at midpoint or at our end, the 88 Black Falcon end, and they use that parking lot as what we call GTA 2, Ground Transportation Area 2. The buses and taxis and other service vehicles that come through there need to be able to circulate in a loop more freely. So we'd be moving those trees aside, allowing the buses, taxis, and other vehicles to circulate, and then putting them back after the ships depart.
Yeah, I guess that was what my question was. In other words, in any given month, you might have them out, then you put them away for a week or two, and then you bring them back out again.
I think it would be days, not weeks at a time. Yeah, the cruise season's real, like I said, I think we had about 35 or 40 visits last year, which was not quite peaked. It peaked pre-COVID at about 45 at our end of the pier. And the ship comes in, the trees are moved out of the way for 24 to 36 hours, and then they'd be moved back. So it's not a long-term thing at all.
Okay, that's all I was asking. I'm getting as bad as John here. It gets late at night. I can't remember what the hell I asked you. All right, I'm all set. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Gearing?
Yeah, so again, on this landscaping, you mentioned canopy trees, multi-stemmed, et cetera. But what kind? How many of each species, et cetera? I'd like to see that. So if we're not going to get that information today, then I'd either entertain a continuance or else entertain having the landscape plan come before the commission before this goes into construction, something like that. I'd like to see more specificity on this. In the submission, you have the BCDC presentation, and there's not a lot of specifics there. I don't see very much in the way of specifics on the landscaping here that satisfy me. So I need something a lot more substantive before I feel comfortable going ahead on this. Agreeing to close the hearing.
Understood. And we understand that landscaping is very important. Unfortunately, at this time, it wasn't available for this proposal. We are at the end of, we're just beginning design development where some of those details will be worked out. My hope is that as a condition of approval, that once the design documents as well as the landscaping documents are complete, we can share them. And if it means, and we'll be happy to present them to this commission in a public setting if that is something that you would entertain.
I'll defer to other commissioners on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Wilson?
Yeah, I'll agree with Commissioner Gearin on that. I appreciate the creativity and basically, some of the other places we've had in the seaport where it's like, there's trucks and other stuff. It's just no can do on the trees. So that's great to see you guys trying to put trees in at least for part of the year, which is, I think, a great workaround. And to Commissioner Gearin's point, I think the tree species, how big these planters are, irrigation, to Commissioner Sullivan's point that, sort of in the potentially some of the hotter and drier months out of the year, they're going to be in storage as opposed to out in a plaza. Just getting a sense of how this will be maintained, because I think this is it's a great solution. It's worked other places. It'd be nice to have this be a solid precedent for other landscaped areas within the city that have sort of temporary or complex demands like this site. So
all set, Commissioner Wilson?
yeah, and that'd be nice to do that at a public hearing as opposed to a administrative.
Sounds like we're heading towards a special commission for that. Commissioner Conan?
Thank you, Chair Herbst. So I am intrigued by this idea of moving trees around. It does seem like a creative solution. Now, when they go away, where do they go?
They're not far. We would just slide them east or west, depending on where they are, wide enough to create a 24 to 30 foot wide travel lane for buses to get through. So they're not going into storage or into the building or anything like that.
They would stay in the plaza area, just wide enough to allow access through it.
I see. Okay. And this is going to happen even as the trees grow and get larger, right?
We'll have to maintain the size of the trees in there. Obviously, they can't grow to be 40 feet tall. That's for sure.
So does that mean you'll be just pruning them or actually replacing them with smaller trees? And what is that
question?
I envision something similar to what you see at Downtown Crossing, where they have those, the various tree pits. that you walk through the downtown crossing that are in these boxes that are movable. Those trees vary in height of 10, 9 or 10 feet or so. In long term, these trees may need to be changed out if they get too big for this purpose. It would be a living exercise, so to speak.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I mean, when they get to be too big and you want to replace them with smaller trees again, where do they go? And can they be a source for other places where instead of having little samplings, these could be the starters?
That's true. Maybe they could be donated to, a public cause that could use them with their needs.
Yeah. So this is a pier, right? And does that mean it's a platform supported by pillars?
Correct.
And you're building on a pier and you're putting 4 more stories on there. It's like, I don't know much about this, but there's a lot of weight being added and people being added onto basically a platform that's supported by pillars and likely surrounded by water as climate change rages on.
So this Max Salvi is the structural engineer, and we've been working on this design for about 3 years, and it's been evaluated 100 different ways.
I would add to that the U.S. Army built this building originally about 100 years ago. The floor slabs on the lower floors are 12 to 18 inches thick. This was built as an armory. It is the original brick. It is a tough building.
And there were railroads were on it too, so it was extremely high weight load rating.
Okay. I appreciate that. So do you have maps from the 2016 flooding for this area?
Plans or could you repeat your question, please?
Well, the flooding from January of 2016, right? Wasn't yeah. Do you have any of those pictures? I'm just curious.
Okay.
That was before we owned it. I don't know, Juan, did you guys have anything? That was before we were in the picture, so we don't have anything.
I'm not aware of any flooding that happened that time. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. I'm not aware of it.
So Chair Herbst, I think this question comes up a lot, at least for me, as to the worst flooding that we've seen so far. How did parcels fare in that flooding? And often if the response is we don't have it, and I just wonder whose responsibility is it to have those pictures for us to look at and have some realistic evaluation. So
it's a good question. I don't think anybody owns that responsibility right now.
Thank you.
Commissioner Richard?
Yeah, thank you very much. I actually have been picking up people at that pier. So I completely agree and appreciate with what they're saying about the need to clear the area. And I think that the suggestion of these sort of movable trees is really very creative, and I'm very much in favor of it. I think that the discussion that just occurred about, what happens when they get too big, and how are they going to be pruned and kept, is really important, and something which we don't seem to have a lot of information about right now. So I normally think that it isn't, we want to get these things done and not come back. But I think that this may be a situation where if you came back on a continuance with that information, you would have, probably, I'm speculating, but probably unanimous support. But right now, I think there are some questions that still aren't answered. But thank you very much. I think it's a great proposal.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Richmond. Allison, were there any questions from the audience or comments?
No hands are raised, and I'm not seeing anything in email or Twitter.
Okay, thanks. So I think what I heard, and I think this may work for you, Commissioner Richmond, was a special condition which would require the proponent to come back before the commission to present the landscape plan, but would not require continuance. They would have to do that before construction. And to me, that makes some sense.
I'm fine with that, with whatever the other commissioners are satisfied with. I just think this was a good discussion, raising interesting points, but my fundamental comment is that the proponent is absolutely right about what happens in that area when boats come in, and seems to me to be a really creative solution.
Okay, thanks. So I do think I was hearing that from the other commissioners, but we'll come back to that. Allison, I know that there were questions about some comments on the special conditions from the proponent. I'll note that the commission is generally loath to change any of our conditions. We like them all. But Allison, I know you've had some conversation with folks, so I'm wondering if you want to address that about whether there are ones remaining that maybe should be changed.
Sure, and I would actually, if you're open to it, Commissioner or Chair, I was not able to reconnect with the team since this afternoon. I know there were a number of typos or edits that we can accept, but it might be a good time now to discuss any substantive issues if the applicant still has concerns.
So are you saying that some have?
I'm saying that there are a number of typos and clarifications, such as the ordinance versus the WPA and 3 versus 4 stories. Those things are all acceptable and good. The more removal of, there were some conditions that John may want to discuss around mobile versus other equipment.
Okay, so I guess I maybe we can flag those. I think the first one I'm seeing that is maybe more than typos is number 30, which asks for adding language that says, is there any chance we can put these on the screen, or is that pushing our luck? Anyway,
Yes, in a minute I can bring them up if you give me 1 minute, but we can continue to discuss them as I bring them.
So the proponent had asked for language for number 30, which gives the commission the right to enter the property for purposes of inspection, and you had asked for subject to reasonable site safety rules established by the project contractor. I guess I'm thinking that is probably not necessary to add as language. Is that something you feel strongly about? We just don't generally change our.
I defer to my client on that. I think the intent was that we don't want someone just showing up if it's an unsafe site. So we want to make sure that the site is safe for them. So there's no potential incidents of accident or anything like that.
I think that goes without saying for our staff, if that you report to them. That
yes.
They'll make arrangements to come at the proper time. That being said, if he does have word that there's some violation, I think he has the right to have you guys make sure it's safe if he needs to inspect right then and there. So I think leaving that language as is without that suggested language is where I would land.
So I defer to my client to see if that's acceptable, or I also wonder at this hour, could we have these conversations? Maybe we have conversations directly with staff where we can walk through them in a more thoughtful manner. But I don't want to hold up the closing. So, whatever your preview, but I think we can come to an agreement on the conditions. It's just, I'm just thinking about the hour and your agenda.
Well, I appreciate that, but I think, well, Allison, I think you felt that there were ones that needed to come before us. They were more than.
Sure. So item number 30, I would recommend to my client that we keep keep it as written in the draft and delete our recommendation.
I think that's okay.
Okay. So the next one is 41, where this is about where equipment can be staged, and the language says that the commission staff may authorize construction laydown areas in the buffer zone, and you've added in land subject to coastal storm flowage, which actually in this site would be preferable to the buffer zone. But I think we've handled that differently in the past, simply by agreement at the startup time. Again, I don't think it needs to have language changed. Allison, was that your advice on that one?
Yeah, Chair, are you perhaps talking about the seaport conditions?
Oh my God. No, I'm looking at
No?
Black Falcon.
No, and item 41, I'm looking at the markups, the red line that we sent you.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
added land subject to coastal storm flowage because the entire parcel is within the land subject to coastal storm flowage. So we would like to be able to lay in store materials there, understanding that if there's a storm coming, that we would secure it or remove it.
And as I said, that's come up before, Allison, but I think we've handled it.
I found the copy to present. Sorry, excuse me, Kat, if you could, I'll take presentation over. Yeah, here we go. Now we're looking at the same thing. Here we go. Continue. Yes, this, as you said, Chair, this has come up in the past, and
I believe we've handled it by arrangement at the startup time with staff.
yes, we could identify a specific area in which to keep, if the entire area is covered by land subject to coastal storm flowage.
So we don't think it needs a language change.
I don't at this time. We could add in a condition identifying on plans the area where materials are to be staged. If that would be acceptable.
I believe, Chris, were you acceptable to that?
Yeah, I think I certainly, I mean, again, the entire site is it's on a pier, so we need a staging area somewhere.
Right.
So item 46, where we talk about refueling, we're gonna have mobile equipment, which we're happy to move out of the floodplain area, but we're also gonna have cranes and other immovable equipment and machinery that will require fueling. So we ask that we are allowed to do refueling for that equipment during the construction period.
And I think this is one that we were looking for Commissioner Sullivan's input.
Yeah, so we've had the standard condition for everything, even with fixed equipment. Where other people would have had like a crane or whatever. And I don't think we've ever enforced and told them to take the crane, pack it up, move it out 70 feet. go up
Right,
to
we
the-
just want to be in compliance as best we can.
Yeah, so I'm Allison, I'll throw this to you. Can we leave our standard language and then they come in and ask for a conditional amendment because this crane is going at this spot? Do you do that as a?
Yeah, I think
during-
if the commission is open to it, I think we could leave our standard language and then add a special condition at the end, again, clarifying the specific site area, if that would be.
Yeah, because I
amenable.
don't know where this crane's gonna go at any time, and if it has to go in two places, it's better that staff deal with it. They go out there and check things out and see what's going on.
So I think that we can add a special condition that covers both of those situations, which is saying that the staff will identify locations within land subject coastal storm flowage for equipment storage and fixed equipment storage. Is that?
Yeah, I'd much prefer that. Because you know how I am about standard conditions. The word standard prevails.
As I said, we like our conditions.
You know what happened? We got an attorney involved. That's what happened.
Oh, that's a big mistake.
I understand. We won't do that again.
So Mike, I don't know if something changed in the files, but I now don't have any.
I mean, we lawyers, is that the problem?
Yes, exactly. Oh, and then I think the final one is item 84, which needs explanation from the proponent.
Yeah, well, he talks about site culverts. There is no site culvert here. Unless what's your definition of a culvert? My definition of a culvert is something that goes under the road that's open-ended and allows water to pass through it. We're obviously we're going to maintaining our on-site, our stormwater system and our pipes associated with that. And if that's the intent of this condition, I'm unclear.
John, if you have no site culverts there, it's gonna be easy to meet this.
Maintain them.
Right.
Understood, okay.
Yeah, if it doesn't apply to you, you can stay, right?
Yeah,
If that's how you'd like to proceed.
that's
Understood.
been our approach to this.
Okay.
Okay. So I think what I'd like to suggest is that I would take a motion to close the hearing with a special condition requiring that the proponent come back before the commission for approval of a landscape plan before construction begins. And with a special condition that prior to startup, staff will identify locations on site for the storage of fixed and mobile equipment.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'll second.
Great.
Can I
Commissioner
ask a
Sullivan.
question about the special condition or?
Sure.
When the landscape plan comes back to the commission as per the special condition, and if the commission does not find it satisfactory, then what happens?
Then they can't start construction. It has to be approved before they start construction.
I see. Okay, thank you.
All right. Commissioner Sullivan,
Aye.
Commissioner Gearin,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson,
Aye.
Commissioner Conan,
Aye.
Commissioner Richmond,
Aye.
and I vote aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Well
much.
done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Me too. And I'm looking for Chair Parker to come back and
Great.
take control.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the break. Okay.
And Kat, could you restart the presentation, please?
She did a great job, Michael.
I had no doubt she would.
Yeah, none of us did.
I was able to purchase my daughter's textbooks during my break, if you can believe that. So productive for everyone. Okay, here we go. There have been a number of continuances continued to the February 15th, 2023 hearing as a notice of intent for DEP file number 0061772 in Boston, file number 2021-010. Continued is notice of intent for DEP file number 0061891 in Boston, file number 2022-046. Notice of intent for DEP file number 0061704 in Boston, file number 2022-007. Continued notice of intent for DEP file number 0061820 in Boston, file number 2021-045. Also continued has been a request for determination of applicability regarding the property located at 2 Starling Street, 34 and 36 Willette Street in West Roxbury. Continued to the February 1st, 2023 hearing is notice of intent for DEP file number 0061907 in Boston, file number 2022-056. The commission will now begin its regular meeting. The first item on the agenda is being continued following that trend, which is a request for certificate of compliance for DEP file number 0061613. Next item on the agenda is a ratification of the emergency certification issued to the Massachusetts Port Authority for the driving of piles to secure marina breakwater barges within the Boston Harbor Shipyard and Marina at 256 Marginal Street in East Boston. Allison, what do you have on that?
Thank you, Chair, and this will sound slightly familiar. As you'll recall from the last hearing on Thursday, we issued an emergency certification following the December 30th storm for the driving of temporary piles. However, after that storm, ACK Marine was only able to drive 2 temporary piles that were shorter than needed. And on January 12th, 2023, staff received a request for an emergency certification, again from the Massachusetts Port Authority and their tenant, Boston Harbor Shipyard and Marina at 256 Marginal Street. Because those piles were short, there were fewer of them that they were able to install, and we were facing a upcoming storm at high tide with high winds directly onto the breakwater, 30 to 50 knots. There was concern that the initial temporary action would not hold, so we issued a following emergency certification to drive further piles to complete the stabilization of the breakwater barges.
Great, thank you. Any questions from any of the commissioners?
This is
Okay,
not
so
the
with
first
that,
time
I
there was
would.
a, oops, sorry,
Yep.
I don't want to delay. It's just that in that area, there have been previous incidents of barge failure and the piles failure. I'm just wondering, why is this an emergency? Why is there no proactive action?
So I think that's something we could invite the the group in to discuss. This was two storms in quick succession hitting at high tide, and the action that they had planned, that they had attempted in after the first storm to secure was not sufficient, but certainly something we can follow up with them on proactive maintenance.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so with that, I'd entertain a motion to ratify the emergency certification issued here to Massport.
So moved.
So moved.
Do we have a
Second.
Second, thank you. Commissioner Sullivan,
Aye.
Commissioner Guerin,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson,
Aye.
Commissioner Conan,
Aye.
Commissioner Richmond,
Aye.
Commissioner Herbst,
Aye.
and I vote aye. That passes 7-0. Okay, thank you, Allison. Do you have any admin updates?
One brief update, staff were notified by DEP on January 13th that while drought conditions have improved in much of the Commonwealth, the Northeast region, which still includes Boston, remains at a level 1 drought. As such, observations of dry perennial streams still may not be submitted as proof that a stream is intermittent in the Northeast drought region.
Okay, any questions for Allison? Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is acceptance of the order of conditions. Commissioner Wilson, you weren't present for the January 4th hearing. Leave it up to you whether you want to recuse yourself or you feel that you've sufficiently reviewed the record and the minutes to vote on these orders of conditions.
I'll recuse. I have not, and I think we have quorum for all of it, right? Okay.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so with that, I would entertain a motion to accept the following orders of conditions for notice of intent for DEP file number 006-1909 and notice of intent for DEP file number 006-1908.
So moved.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second, although I do want to point out what you're seeing on the screen, at least for the public, is not what we're voting on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Sullivan,
Aye.
Commissioner Guerin,
Aye.
Commissioner Conan,
Aye.
Commissioner Richmond,
Aye.
Commissioner Herbst,
Sorry, aye.
and I vote aye. So that carries 6-0. Okay, thank you. Let's see, must be time to accept the meeting minutes. Do we have a motion to accept the meeting minutes from January 4th, 2023?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Sullivan,
Aye.
Commissioner Guerin,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson, have you reviewed the minutes or do you want to recuse yourself?
I'll just, yeah, recuse.
Thank you. Commissioner Conan,
Aye.
Commissioner Richmond,
Aye.
Commissioner Herbst,
Aye.
and I vote aye. That carries 6-0, one recusal. And with that, I would accept a motion
had a
to
quick-
adjourn by acclamation.
I had a quick
Commissioner
question.
Sullivan? Yeah, sure.
How much longer are we gonna be able to remotely participate, or are we gonna be dragged back into the depths of City Hall at some point in time in our lives?
Oh, we have the Commissioner of the Environmental Department present this evening. Maybe we could ask her that question.
So I will check on the exact date unless Kat has memorized it. I know that a few months hence, it's expected to expire unless the legislature further extends it, but there are bills pending that would extend it more permanently. We will see what happens and we'll keep you posted.
Yeah, okay. I just look forward to which legislator I have to call up and beg for them to vote for it, that's all.
To add to that.
All of them.
Yeah, it's so after March 31st of 2023 is when the current legislation, the current provisions expire. We are fairly confident that there's going to be an extension, if not potential for the remote meeting provisions to actually be made permanent. But we'll be continuing to follow that and be hopefully not having to make arrangements for any April meetings to be happening in person, but if need be, we will be prepared.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kat. Okay, with that, can we adjourn? Fantastic. Okay. Allison and Kat, thank you again so much. And we'll see everybody in a few weeks.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Michael.